Welcome to episode 20 of the Heart of the Shaman podcast. And I'm Pavan, and I'm here today with Stacie Barber, who is a life coach and entrepreneur and a business owner. And I'm really excited. We're going to be diving into the broad but very timely topic of embodiment that's been coming in really strong for 2026 and really in the past few years.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Pavan. It's such an honor to be here. And I agree. Yeah, I think that the timing of this is ideal. So I really appreciate you inviting me in for the conversation.
Thank you,
Mhm.
Stacie. So we actually were just talking a little bit about timing, and you had mentioned that as being a really resonant piece of this, and that was lighting up quite a bit for me as well. I feel like, there's divine timing, which we talk about, and I guess there's the piece of even what is that, right? And depending on your belief structure, it's sort of this aspect of the universe or spirit is also working with you. This is sort of like, I don't know, I'm going to say my version maybe of
Mhm.
explaining it, but to bring things together for your highest path or the journey that you're choosing in this lifetime choice. And we're a part of things, but at the same time, it's bigger than us. And so there's this piece of surrendering, I think. And I want to say that's a word that not everyone loves, that I feel like I understand. But, it's sort of like there's a loss of control, or at least a feeling of that potentially in the surrender. But in that space, there's so much more possibility. So I feel like this is something I'm sure you could speak to a lot as well. And it's like, yeah, do we want to have an experience where the field of possibilities is open and potentially what unfolds is beyond what we could envision or set a goal towards. And oftentimes, even if whatever that is involves like challenge or, struggle or pain, there's still this awareness and getting to the other side of it of like, I don't know what other way I could have, sort of learned this thing or had an experience to get to now the version of who I am.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're so right. There's so much that, like, there's weight underneath that word surrender that I feel like we all hold on to because it feels like, okay, here, just everything. And we're not really taking in the aspect of we're co-creating what's coming next. We were just talking about this. It's not a passive circumstance. Like, we're always in that space of free will, of choice, and staying open to what's next. And in my own life, I can truly speak to the fact that when I do pull back my reins and stop gripping on the timing or the way that something's going to look or all the details, it always blows my mind. I'm always surprised in the best of ways that these opportunities unfold that I could have never imagined in my human brain. The ways in which they come about, the people that are placed in my path, the healing that's brought up again that I really need to look at before I'm ready to step into the next version of what it is that I'm being called to. All of those things, I think, really require us to pull back just a bit. And I'm always such a big fan of saying, really open up the periphery of how we're looking at things. I think we can be so, put the blinders on and look straight ahead without seeing all the little nudges and signs that I believe the universe, divine, is always sending us through either nature or other people or nudges in our own body. And if we're not so hyper focused on where we're going, the destination that we've decided for ourselves, we can actually start to see and hear and take those in. And I'm a fan of a detour, like,
Yeah.
I have the idea of A to B in my head, but most of the time we're to take a little detour. And on those side roads is when we really get these beautiful experiences that make coming back in alignment to where we're headed so much really sweeter, because we're more aligned. And, really about what this conversation is embodied. It's really asking us to step into all that it is that it's bringing forth for us. So, yeah, I I think we all probably have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with the word surrender, but I do think
Mhm.
it's a necessary component of the journey.
Yeah, and I like that, when you mentioned the detour, it's like there's this lightness and this magic that can come into our experience. I
Mhm.
know for myself, oftentimes I just get like too serious about things. And that's a great balance too. It's like, you know, I get it. We learn to like, who am I and what am I doing and what is the next thing? And sort of the pace of things can bring us into a little bit of an autopilot where then you're like, whoa, like what just happened? Or what year is it? Or, something
Yes.
like this. And this, sort of slowing down and being more present with things is really huge, but also it allows for that magic and that lightness potentially instead of this sort of more hard edged feeling of
Mhm.
like, what am I accomplishing? And this sort of next thing that we set, which is just a total rotation throughout life. So,
Mhm.
we all sort of know, at least in the mind space, like you get to something and, maybe you have, I don't know, like 2 weeks tops of like, whoa, the thing. And then you're just on to the next.
100%.
Yeah. So there's this piece of the embodiment, like what's coming through around that is like, who am I guess? Who
Mhm.
am I being in that shift that we've also talked about of like the being versus the doing? What does it look like? And I think one version of embodiment, like what's coming to me is you've integrated and now you're also like bringing through in the present certain shifts or growth that at some point along the way there was an awareness of sort of like moving in that direction or moving towards that energy. Oftentimes it's for healing, but sometimes it's just like clear, this is where I'm going. And also we can't necessarily point to one thing like what I'm feeling is you might have something happen in life, right, where you're sort of in the moment. Wow, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I would have really reacted differently, whether it's emotional or triggered or less conscious or whatever the thing may be. But in the moment, as it's unfolding, there's this, wow, this is so much different. Like I am a different version of myself. But also, what's funny is a lot of the time you can't point to, it's not like, oh, well, that's because I, went on that retreat 2 weeks ago, or I did that meditation for 45 minutes for 40 days or something. And that must be what shifted it. It's the embodiment. It's a
Yeah.
little bit less specific in terms of what you can point to, but it's like every day, every moment.
Mhm.
What are we choosing? That's a big part of it.
Yes, I totally agree. What's so resonant to me, I mean, sitting in your office, like not, there's not that much space in between the time that I was there and feeling like a palpable difference in myself. I
Mm,
remember just sitting back in the chair and being like, "Oh, I feel different in here." Like
yes.
realizing that I am. And there's something really beautiful about that of being able to have a bit of a ritual of being in that space and starting to notice how you're showing up different that really lands, I think. But I have to be paying attention to notice that, right? And
Mhm.
being open to sensing that. And I agree. I think it's a accumulation of all of the work that really from birth on that we're asked to lean
Right.
into. And we have the choice of either opening to and being, allowing ourselves to look at what's coming through, or diverting, or again staying on that, trajectory of, okay, what's next, what's next. And when we allow ourselves to really pull back and sort of be excited and proud of ourselves for the work that we've done, that's really special. And I think those are the moments when, again, when I could sit there and be in that space and feel a completely different energy in my body and notice, wow, I'm showing up to this exact same circumstance that I was talking about a year ago with a completely different energy. And it's because of the diligence of staying in that and noticing what's coming up that really helps you to then step into all of the versions that are being asked through all those little trials that come through as part of life. I really find that that's leaning in and really noticing. I'm such a fan, and I know you are too, of like, what is our body saying to us at any moment? And when I can feel that exhale throughout my system, that's that for me is a sign of, well done. You're on the right track. Continue on. And I felt that. And that's such a joy, to be able to experience.
I think also like what was coming through as you were sharing that really strongly too is like the receiving aspect. Like, yeah, when can we receive and notice and kind of celebrate what has shifted? And that really is very connected to the embodiment as well, which is slowing down. I feel like I'm like, okay, I don't want to, sound like a broken record at any point, but like there's so much emphasis on can we slow down and figure out how to be present? And there's all kinds of tools and something that I often tell people is, a good place to start is like to just put an alert in your phone throughout the day to check in at different things. Cause there is like a rewiring of the subconscious. And, there's certain things where it's like, okay, we're just breaking patterns so that we can be a little bit more present and aware. But then when you notice that you are and something's shifted, it also would be a shame to like, I don't know, only notice it for like 5 seconds or something. And okay,
Totally.
good, now what am I doing? Or, now just like shifting focus to the next thing. It's sort of like, again, some of that lightness and the magic is like slowing down and being with it and like,
Mhm.
wow, this is pretty amazing.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Because there is, I think there's so much that all of us, if we're really honest, there's so much that we want to do. We have the desires in our heart, right? And our human brains are always they're wanting us to expand and grow, and it's a beautiful thing. And I always say like capital AND, if we're just, 80 miles an hour forward, we're not really able to take in the experience of the journey, right? Of the day to day, of the moment to moment. And I think children can be such a beautiful reminder of this because they're constantly changing right before our eyes. And if we don't relish and soak in, the little moments that, like, oh my gosh, she, like, just this weekend, my oldest daughter, we were in a hotel room and she laid her head in my lap. Like, she hasn't done that in years. She's 13,
Oh,
And if I would have just been like, yeah, I just sat and I was like, don't move because I really want to take this in. And that for me, that's the juice, right? That's what keeps us connected to ourselves and to others. And it just helps us remember like what this is all, the purpose of it all. But we have to, keep the desires and the growth and all of that alive and be able to access the parts of us that want to relish in the here and now. I think both of those dynamics have to be alive and well in us to be able to really fully experience this thing called life.
yeah. And also a huge benefit to the presence, the slowing down, the embodiment is the physical side of things, right? It's like, as within, so without, are we working on something from like a physical standpoint or more of an inner standpoint? And either way, all layers of our being, I guess is one way of saying it, are impacted. But there's
Hmm.
something, like anxiety and like a lot of symptoms that are stress related and nervous system related that are very uncomfortable and also do take us out of the present are also connected to a faster pace and not having that awareness, which again, usually does sort of have to be learned. It's sort of like you don't notice these things that can ground us in our life. And then we also feel uncomfortable potentially, because of whether it's a faster pace or I'm going to say another thing that can be common is like focusing only on certain things. So
Hmm.
that does connect back to the timing and the divine timing that we were touching on because there and the surrender that is kind of like, ooh, can I do that? But it's like, yeah, if we're not we don't have the blinders, as you said, and we can sort of cast a wider net and feel more energy. Then the exhale in the body, the relaxing in the body, like all of this is possible. Um, and I know a lot of times women, especially at a certain point, just don't feel physically great based on certain stress levels. And the stress is often this is sort of an oversimplification, but anxiety oftentimes is attached to like worry and future projection. And then more depressed, disconnected states are like past energy. And, being overly maybe ruminating on the past or
Mm-hmm.
something we couldn't change that we wanted to, this sort of thing. So there can be real pulls to like cast energy into the future or really connect it back to the past.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of a better way to say it in this moment, but it's like not where we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
I feel confident that
Yes.
someone could challenge that as a statement. It's like, yeah, we're meant to be in the present. This is the only reality. There is no future, which is also like, that sounds scary. But how can we, it's like the nourishment and the presence of this moment is
Mhm.
what creates the next and the next and the next.
Yes, it's so
So,
true. It's so interesting. There's a visual that my therapist has shared with me often that I love. And it's the idea of jumping in a boat and you're leaving one shore headed to the other. And so if you think about this,
mm,
the past is behind us and the future is forward. And at some point, you get in between the two that you can't see one or the other. So
mm,
you're in this void of the in between, which is reality, right? And how often do we turn the boat around and start hyper, pedaling back because it feels comfortable over here? We know what this is, even if it's not healthy. Or we start, jetting towards the future and we're missing that when we get into that space where you can't see one or the other, that again, it feels almost like a void. It can feel a bit like discomfort in the body, but I also feel like when we come up to the edge of anything of that not knowing, there is a sense in our body of we're not sure what's next, and being able to embody the tools and the even if it's just deep breathing or reminding ourselves you are safe, coming back to the present moment, knowing that it will all work out. Like there's that deep trust and that there will be a direction that you'll find, right? But like being comfortable in that in between space and speaking from so much experience, especially for the past year for me, it's this I've sort of paddled in the in between space. You get to this point where you're like, okay, like I release the expectation of when the next shore is going to present itself, and I know that I've outgrown this one. And it's not willing I'm not willing to just sacrifice and turn around and go back, right?
ooh,
So often we say this is comfortable, this is what I know, but it's being in that in between long enough. I think that for me personally, I'm being asked to, can we be comfortable here? And I'm finally feeling like, yeah, I can find my footing here and know that I won't be here forever, that this too shall
right.
pass. That's just the natural progression of it all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there can be this balance of like what is here for me and also this too shall pass. Like we don't have to love it in every moment, but we don't have to also be like, wishing it away.
Hmm.
A space of neutrality is how it's coming, and I feel like I sort of want to qualify that with it doesn't mean that we can't have like emotions or feel whatever way we feel about where we are, because we're gonna
Yeah.
feel
Oh, yeah.
some type of way about it. But at the same time, this neutrality, and I think it's bringing in another angle of the embodiment. It's like as we're more present and more aware, we have more capacity to be the observer of our experience and feel more neutral, meaning less emotional, less triggered, less of the let me get like really row the boat fast or turn around, like all of these components. And there starts to be a like, this is me and this is my reality, but also
Hmm.
I'm aware of what's going on in a very maybe bird's eye view or multifaceted way.
Yes.
It happens pretty naturally for women because we're very intuitive. So you don't have to like, intellectualize, like, how can I be aware of all these things? It's
Hmm.
very inherent, which is refreshing.
Yeah, absolutely. You're like, thank goodness. Well, and I think we've got such an innate ability. And again, I think it's tied into caretaking and whatever that looks like for us, like we're naturally built to be able to care for others, whether it be our own children or our parents, whatever it is, in life. And there's an ability to respond to what's showing up, right? With a grounded sense versus reacting or putting out like the little fires around us. There's ability, I think for me, like responding is being able to sit and take in all that's going on and choose how I'm going to what my next action is going to be in response to whatever it is that's showing up. And I do. I think that that is an innate thing within the female structure for survival
Mhm.
to be able to say, how can I care for myself and others around me in this moment without running or reacting to circumstances that show up. And that's a really beautiful thing. And I think when that can be applied to all the parts of our lives, like our, whatever it is, and that we're looking for, career or the next step for us and romantic life or whatever it is that's showing up, being able to respond to the little cues and pings that are coming in, following that, like little breadcrumbs, I think is such a beautiful and it can be fun, a fun
Yeah.
way to go about this process of, I didn't expect that person to reach out, or I didn't expect to run into this person or experience this. This is a really beautiful way to, again, be in any arena and enjoy being there, settling in.
Yeah, it feels like allowing it to be a discovery, like you're
Mm.
saying, which is so much more fun than, you know, any variety of ways we might be in resistance to things. It's like, it's also that release of the control and the surrender because we're not like, this is what needs to happen or this is what I'm trying to, sort of walk into, whatever the case may be. But okay,
Mhm.
it's like a choose your own adventure. I'm just discovering, like you said, the breadcrumbs, what comes next, and seeing it, honoring it. Another thing that's coming through is definitely circling back to the timing, which is the thing at the forefront that you mentioned. And this year is a 1 year in numerology, and there's other layers that have similar significance to that. But ultimately, it has a lot to do with beginnings. And a year sometimes can feel like, oh, that's a long time, And if it's like, okay, well, it's for a whole 9 year cycle, the whole year is like new energy, feeling into it, setting it up. And I know I can speak from experience where there's a couple of things that have been circulating, I'm going to say for like 3-ish years, where, those few years, there's this aspect of, okay, I feel like that's a potential this year, and sometimes there
Mhm.
is some expectation of, oh, it feels like, this is where I'm headed.
Mhm.
And then it's a couple years later and it's like still there, but you're like, okay, wow, that's a couple years, And
Mhm.
so if you're kind of coming into this year with some things that feel like they've been circulating in the possibilities for you for a few years, it can feel like, okay, this is challenging. Like, is this going to be another year where I sort of go inward and stay present and maybe these things don't come to fruition or whatever? But it goes back to what we were saying, like, can you
Mhm.
really, really sink into the possibilities, the not knowing, the no expectations? And there's a humble aspect to that
Oh,
because it's
yeah.
like, it may come up as, okay, but this is year 3 or 4 or 5 or, whatever the case may be. And from a more spiritual context and even an energetic context, the timelines are much less significant and it's not as linear as the way we experience things.
Mhm.
So it's like, no big deal. But
So
we're like, what the heck is going on, So I've been
Mhm.
sharing with people, that you have your personal astrology and of course like our personal experiences of the themes and the threads of what has been happening for us, but this is a year that's like setting up the energy and bringing in really like breadcrumbs of new
Mhm.
energy, like you said, versus it's not impossible that it could happen that you anchor some new thing, right? But it's not the theme. It's
Right.
definitely not the theme. So, I think it's just good to put it out there because it's like,
Mhm.
okay, well, yeah, maybe we're gonna be sitting with that for a while, or, maybe it's gonna be a few months before that feels more comfortable.
Mhm. Absolutely. I always give, myself and all of us such grace that we have human brains in this very spiritual experience, and to be like, well, of course this is hard. Of course this is frustrating. Like you were speaking to, not resisting the emotion of in my mind, we create little timelines, and giving ourselves grace that is such a human thing to do.
Mhm.
And realizing that, yeah, it may or may not work out like that. And it's beautiful. And just to give ourselves that permission to then say, okay, I'm trusting, I'm releasing the control of this, and trusting that I can't see why this thing hasn't come to fruition or what's coming next. But I have to trust that there are reasons, maybe I'm ready, but maybe, let's say, the next person that's in line for whatever, that I'm asking to move towards or release, they're not ready yet, right? Like
Mhm.
there's so many behind the scenes. I always like feel like it's like they're back there for dress rehearsal, it's like little nuggets that are happening that we could never even fathom, that are bringing around all of these opportunities or individuals that make sense when they arrive. But in that in between, we kind of feel like there's not a lot going on. And I think that part is where it gets really uncomfortable. We start to get a little anxious or
Mhm.
antsy of, well, what do I need to do next? What needs to be happening? And really, again, pulling back and noticing that there is so much happening and that it will arrive exactly when it's supposed to. And I always love the practice of what I say, turning around and looking backwards at my life and noticing how many times it worked out just like that. That I had an idea in my mind or in my heart of how I wanted something to play out. And looking back and being like, oh, I wouldn't have been ready for that then. It needed to be a little bit longer. Or, oh my goodness, this amazing opportunity showed up at just the right time when I needed it to. And so I think if we can all give ourselves that practice as well, to turn around and be like, help us make sense of the timing of it and notice how often it was right on time for our lives. It helps us with the process moving forward of allowing ourselves to be in that in between.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. I feel
Hmm.
like the right on time can be so magical. And also, so an example of some themes might be like personal leadership and authenticity, or in the last podcast, things that I touched on. But those are examples of like what maybe is circulating for somebody on an individual level. But there's even a subtle space where we can have an expectation of, when we get clarity on, oh, this keeps showing up, this is something I'm sort of working out or stepping into, or whatever the case may be, that it's still kind of like is meant to look a certain way. And even in that, when you couple it with the divine timing, it's like, okay, personal leadership, take that day by day and hour by hour. And it's in whatever interaction. So, it's with your family or it's at work, or um in this example, it's like, leadership could be sort of a loaded, maybe there's
Hmm.
some bigger things where you're like seeing yourself speaking to 1,000 people, or, doing something in some bigger way, energy wise, in that sense. And there's something important about, I think, how what feels bigger. I don't know if there's a
Mm.
better way, and we sometimes skew what is significant. Um, it's just not about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it just feels like there's this gift in the awareness of, okay, it's, let me find my authentic self. Or that's
Mm.
also a good example where, oh, in a 1 year, if you're discovering maybe a deeper or truer version of who you are authentically, which ultimately, has changed from prior times. So this could
Hmm.
just be a refresh. It's not even to say we didn't know who we are, we don't know, but there's just things changing and shifting. And it's like, okay, authentically, we can check in every moment, an hour. And again, from an intuitive perspective, this can happen relatively organically, to see, yeah, in my body, do I feel contracted about this thing? Or
Yeah.
is it bringing up conflict? Or, and then sort of choose accordingly. And all those little moments and days and months make up this shift into the embodiment and the more authentic and so we could be like, okay, well, that one event is going to be a really good opportunity to like be authentic or something, not that we're
Yes.
not trying to, but really recognizing that again, it's every moment, it's all the breadcrumbs, it's the presence. We're not
Mhm.
racing to anything.
Yeah, it's so true, and I feel, we tend to spend our days with the same people, the same like, I again, noticing my children growing and my mom lives 5 hours away, and she'll be like, "Oh my god, she's gotten so much taller," and I'm like, "What? Really?" I haven't noticed because, and we do that. We spend our days a lot of the times with the same people, and so our change is so gradual that sometimes, again, we don't have a chance to really celebrate, like, "Oh my
Mm,
god, I have really evolved and developed into a completely different realm of who I was a year ago, 2 years ago, because we're in it. We're in that work. And so there is a really beautiful ability to either, find someone, to be around someone that we haven't been in presence with in years and then really call out in us like, I can feel a difference in you. I can see a difference in you. And, I think a really beautiful practice is how can we start to do that for ourselves? Like, how can those versions of us really start to zoom out and celebrate and relish in those moments because we take them for granted, every single one of us, until they're called out. And I mean, going back again to the last time I was in your room, like you were able to call that out in me and help me notice it in myself too. We were able to acknowledge that. And that's such a gift to be able to be in the presence of someone that can hold that and call that out and present that for you of I can see and feel a difference. This is like bravo. The celebration part is really truly important for us to continue on that path.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And
Mhm.
I also, it's like we are having a human experience, right? And celebration is so sensory, like I just was getting these visions of like good foods and dancing and all of these different things that we may choose to do depending on what we're celebrating. And then, we have our conventional things that we celebrate a wedding or a graduation or something. But yeah, with what we're talking about, it's like, how can we receive it and how can we have a sensory experience? And I feel like those are, it's like, yeah, there is reason for why we're having a human experience. While also, this is, a somewhat spiritual conversation, but in channeling the energy that way, it's like, yeah, like, what does it mean to celebrate, like, feel
Mhm.
good, but also it's probably in this body, like, have good food and,
Mhm.
dance or, I mean, there's lots of other examples to, do something fun outdoors, etcetera. But it's like, what better is there to do while we're here?
It's exactly. Well, I can't remember, it's someone in the realm, but they're like, If you're here on purpose. Like, there's a reason. There's a reason that you're here." And, like, that's a gift, right? And
Yeah.
and noticing, every day that we get to wake up and experience this life, that it's a gift. And even when it's tough, right? Even when we're going through the drudgery of the thing that keeps coming up and what is this about and why am I here again, it's always helping, it's always that nudge to help us get back to really experiencing the being here on purpose, like what is it to be in this body in this life. And I think that in itself has been such a relevant thing for me in my life. I think back of like I lost my dad when I was, in my mid 30s. And I think for me, noticing that him passing so young, there's a way death can be such a gift for us that are still here. And
Yes.
that reminding of, like you get to continue this and don't take it for granted is
Mm,
also a really, really beautiful part. And so there is so much around that, like when we open our eyes in the morning, and say, "Oh, I get to do this again."
yes.
Having, like realizing that that's a present that's been wrapped up for us. and really taking advantage of it in the most beautiful way.
And it feels like it can be very courageous when it is things that are more challenging, right? Like, we often can feel like, I can't be in this, or how do I get out of this? And it's like, even if that comes up emotionally, or we have thoughts around it and we're having that whole experience, there's a real courage in staying in the thing, staying with the thing, and we are facing the unknown. Like, say the example is, an uncomfortable confrontation with someone you're close to, or it's like you don't know the outcome, so part of it is fear, like, what if I lose this relationship, or what if this ruins something else, or even if we're not thinking all these things, there's usually an energy around, like, and the courage to stay with whatever it is that's challenging. That's part of, like, the gift that you're talking about also. I mean, there's just such a gift in that, and so there's something about this too that's, like, celebrating the depth of whatever it is, and it's
Mm.
not always things that maybe are perceived as, like, happy or joyous initially, if that makes sense. Yeah. Celebrating, the awareness around someone's death and passing, and yeah, I mean, there's so many things where it's like, again, it could be a less conscious experience, and it's not making anything right or wrong, but oftentimes when it's something that does have more energy and it's less conscious in our lives, it does circle back at a later time. And then oftentimes we have, guilt or shame or whatever, the emotions may be that are going to kind of mire us in the thing. And that also is an opportunity. It's just a spiral. So it's like, okay, it's going to be a different experience 3 years later to sit with an energy than maybe it was, when it was actually happening even. So I feel like it's important to say, yeah, we're having the human experience. There's no right or wrong. And
Mhm.
yet courage, and then the celebration and all of that associated with sort of anchoring into whatever is uncomfortable or good. I mean, it doesn't have to be uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, as you're speaking, I'm just so reminded of the idea of homeostasis in the body, right? Like our body is always working towards and moving towards a sense of balance and wellness. And I believe that in the spiritual realm too, and that we're always being moved towards that. And so when I'm faced with something that, you know, could be uncomfortable or unexpected, there is that reminder that this is showing up in order to. Everything's always asking me to move more into that full, well, balance version of me, and trusting that, yeah, this could be a little uncomfortable, or I'm not quite sure how to navigate this, but I'm trusting that this is coming up because in order for me to get to where I'm hoping to, this I have to deal with this. I have to look at this. I have to heal this. I have to allow, air and light to come into like dark spots in my spiritual system or in my body, and really be present to that, trusting that it's always moving us towards that sense of wellness and balance. That for me, and all the work that I've done, it's been such a sort of like a center point to come back to, that like there's a whole way in which all the systems are working. And if we can really lean in that, like, yeah, this is showing up because your body's telling you something, it's speaking to you, or this thing keeps coming up in this relationship because it's really asking you to look at it so that your body can heal, so your spirit can heal, so your inner child can heal. All of those parts, these things are showing up for a purpose. And knowing that the end goal is to be more balanced and just really feel at home in our system. I think that helps me really lean into that trust aspect, like trust in the greater working of the systems overall.
And it feels like we can lean into the cycles for support in
Yeah.
this, like the seasonal cycles, the cycle of the year, all of these pieces. As you were saying that, I was just feeling like, yeah, it's the flexibility. And we're going into the spring season, which is associated with the element of wood and flexibility. And at some point, I came across just a very simple story about, I'm not going to go into the story actually, because it'll potentially take too long. the flexibility, when you think about wood as an element, it's like, yeah, you could have a dry, brittle stick that you can easily break in half, or the new growth and the flexible limbs. And even if we're talking about a huge oak tree, or, you know, it doesn't have to be young per se. And then it's kind of incredible, right? We see these trees maybe that are like by the side of a river, or they've grown in certain ways where they're flexible with the environment, and they have these long, potentially heavy limbs, but they're still flexible with like the wind. And so as we go into the spring season, things tend to pick up the pace of things. And, like oftentimes we do have maybe a bit more on our schedules. There's a different feel. And I think part of it is positive and hope and new and all of this that we get to have this year throughout the year. But the flexible piece is it's so relevant, not just in this moment, but for everything we've been discussing, for the
Mhm.
embodiment. And I'm just feeling like, okay, if we are balanced in the physical body, in all of our systems, right, we have these elements working in a balanced way. So, there is water in the system and fire in the digestion and, touching on all of this. But if we don't have that flexibility, then it actually shows up in a physical way also. It's, okay, your joints are stiff, and there's lots of different examples, or, our posture is like really out of alignment.
Mm.
This is kind of a different topic maybe, but what's coming through too, as I said, that is there's all different modalities that resonate with different people. So hopefully I can tie this together, but that just feels important to mention as
Mhm.
well. It's like we've talked about different techniques that, potentially you can use to slow things down and be more grounded. And, for some people, they're going to try breath work, and it's just going to be like really effective. Typically, that's one of my favorites, so I feel biased, but I feel like, if you stick with it, it'll be effective eventually.
Yeah.
But, somebody, I think it's when I was mentioning the joints, I was suddenly thinking of chiropractic, or,
Mm.
it depends on your constitution, and it depends on a lot of factors, what's going to resonate with you. So there's something, here it is, flexible in the way that we support ourselves also, because it changes throughout the course of our life. It doesn't have to look a certain way, and it's not going to necessarily be the same as what our sister or our friend or someone else is doing to find balance. And that's both in the ways we find support, and then also like the tools that we utilize. So it's
Mhm.
very individual, which I think is pretty cool, because that's part of the creative part too, just discovering what works and how that changes over time, and kind of takes the pressure off of, I need like a certain routine, or I need to figure out a thing that fixes something.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think too, when we get that rigidity around the things or the modalities, we're not really listening, right? So often we're just staying in that idea of what has worked, and remembering that we're all evolving and changing, and our bodies are changing, the needs are changing, like what we think we used to need might change. For me, I tend to run pretty high. Like, I need grounding. Like, I need to feel that stability and like my feet on the ground. That for me helps me feel balanced. And I wouldn't have sought that out earlier in my life. And just becoming more and more aware. Like, I love, like you said, everybody's so individual, and finding what it is that our body's asking for, that our system's asking for. But that takes us slowing down and listening first, right?
Hmm.
And allowing ourselves to maybe expand what it is that we want to subtract or add to our rituals and our routines that might apply more readily for us now. I think that's just staying present to it is that's so key.
So we've got a few more minutes, and then we'll close. And I just feel like, as I sort of tuned into like, okay, we're coming towards the end. This has been such a balance tuning in and conversation that really goes beyond the topic of embodiment. But yeah, it just feels so balanced. So the flexibility, and even like maybe how the elements relate, and how can we slow down, and presence, and we touched on the physical, and that just all feels important. It's like you could be ungrounded, or you could be in a spiritual space, or, you could be way too in the physical space. And it goes back to the flexibility. But yeah, that balance is really key, but also individual. It's like, okay, what is that for us? And it's kind of always changing, really. So that also connects to the surrender piece, because it's like, let me just see what it is, not try to dictate that for
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, what has been so simple yet profound is allowing myself to sit with myself.
Mm.
Just being with me, and noticing maybe what thoughts might want to start to race or whatever. And just sitting back and acknowledging and allowing myself. I love journaling. I love being able to typing's so different for me. It's pen to paper. It's so cathartic and it allows me to get all of the things and ideas that are rolling around here out, and it allows this piece of paper to hold that for me, and being able to just sit in quiet, in presence, and just be with myself. And I think we all go back to the unexpected uneasiness of being forced to sit with ourselves during COVID, that we had never really had to like that in those moments. But I think there were so many little nuggets of really gifts that came out of that time that gave us, for me in particular, permission to slow
Mhm.
down and to sit with myself. That has been such a lovely addition to something that's felt necessary in my day to day. And I think also reminding everyone that it doesn't have to feel complicated. Can literally be, I drive 5 minutes to work every day, rolling my window down and turning the music off and just being, or just going out on my back porch and listening. The birds are very resonant to me, as you know. Being, like we're in the human doing all the time, especially if we have children or jobs or things that are pulling us in all the different directions. Any little nuggets, any little aspects where we can just go and sit and feel the sun on our skin or hear the birds singing. It reminds us that we're, a speck on this speck in this universe that's constantly, holding us and moving with us. And so I think that can feel so simplistic and can be found anywhere, that can really start to, like we were talking about, this those little breadcrumbs, things start to show up, right? And we start to notice and become aware, and we feel different when we allow ourselves just to be. And so that for me has been pretty profound aspect that has been necessary for my well-being, really, for quite some time.
I feel like it is such a gift to anyone tuning in that you're bringing that through towards the end. And even the way that you're saying it, sit with yourself, and the examples you gave, it's not like you have to be in a dark space of silent, like a dark room, silent room or something. But it is very underrated. And a lot of times we, I'm going to say, even think we're doing that, but potentially maybe we're not. I mean, there's so many distracting things, right? We've got whatever, we've got social media, we've on and on and on. And so, yeah, I'll just give an example of, like, if you're going for a walk, but like you're also like listening to something, and if you have too many layers, it's not making it wrong. It's one way of, like experiencing life and yourself. But there is a certain level of noise that we're eliminating in order to truly be able to tune in. So, yeah, you can be listening to the birds, or there still can be some aspects of, I'm going to say, light aspects of doing.
Yes.
And it's how it works for you. Like, I always feel like when I just like go on a walk in nature, and I do like to be like, okay, I'm not listening to anything, I'm not tuning into anything else except for like my surroundings. That's powerful. I'm also with me, and sometimes the me is very loud.
Yes.
But yeah, underrated. It's
And
and also,
overcomplicated sometimes,
yeah,
we complicate it.
right. What if I want to encourage, I mean, everyone's in a different place, but encouraging people to just sort of recognize how you already do this. And maybe if there's other ways you can step into it, because it's also like, yeah, what if it's that simple? Embodiment and slowing down, and just that's the shift.
Yeah, Absolutely. I agree. And I think, I'm such a lover of nature and animals and we have two dogs and just watching, how an animal will start to settle itself, it'll like stretch out or do this like pause or it'll have this sigh that comes out, right? And just sort of land. And I think there's such great examples of just allowing themselves to be. And it's a reminder for me when I see them do that, of going into this really luscious stretch for an extended amount of time that's possible for me. I can do that at any point. I can
Mhm.
put down my work and allow myself just to breathe a deep breath in and sigh out, like letting our nervous systems really start to calm because that's when we're receptive. That's when we can that's when we're available, right?
Mhm.
When we're, in all the different sympathetic everywhere up here, fight or flight or flee, we're not receptive to seeing what's coming in. When we allow ourselves just to be, that's when we can start to, oh, I never even noticed that. That's amazing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so right, nature and animals as such a great example. It's funny, I also have 2 dogs, and one of them I've been working on training. He's a little over a year now, but, it's like you train them when they're in that relaxed, receptive space, right? And, like, they also can be excited or elevated in some sort of way, and then it's not gonna be effective. So, yeah, it's such a perfect example of, okay, where's the receptivity? It's in that it's very obvious to see in their nervous systems, like, "Okay, calm right now, receptive."
Absolutely. Open. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. And I think, I really feel like that's especially where we are in the time of life that we're in. We're really all being called to sort of settle into that, because I feel like there's so many messages coming. I really believe that. So many messages and just having space for that, to hold that also, allowing ourselves, our systems to have space to let those things drop in. That's that's when we really start to see, oh my goodness, this is what's next. Or this is, we get excited or we follow this amazing connection with someone. It's those simple things. But yeah, really trusting that we're being asked to sit and be with ourselves and stay open to all that's dropping in.
Right, there's a lot to discover here.
Mhm. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Stacy, and I can put a link to your website or any information with the podcast that you would like. And thank you to everyone for, sharing the energy, the space with us, for tuning in. I just always feel like there's such a positive ripple effect, however that manifests from conversations like this and tuning into the energy in a deeper way. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Pavan. Thank you, everyone.